The victims of the shooting at Michigan State University have been identified, but police have still not determined a motive for the senseless killing that took the lives of 3 students and injured 5 others. Turns out that unidentified object that was shot down by the U.S. may not have been a threat to the U.S. after all. And Turkey and Syria are struggling to care for orphans after the earthquake. More than 41,000 people died in last week's quakes. Officials in both countries are still trying to figure out how many children have been left without parents and how to care for them. The gunman in a racist massacre at a Buffalo supermarket last year was sentenced to life in prison without parole today after he apologized for his attack amid a torrent of raw emotions from the victims' families, including one man who lunged at him in court. And an Ohio town has been told not to drink its water, but instead to drink bottled water after a train derailed earlier this month, spilling dangerous chemicals and causing a huge fire in East Palestine near Pennsylvania. Residents are returning after evacuating, but they're still concerned about the safety of the water supply. And this is for the men out there. A new form of birth control for men has shown promising results. The drug stops sperm from turning, quote unquote, on for a short period of time, according to a study that was conducted on mice. And Nikki Haley, we talked about her yesterday, but today she had her first public appearance as she has said, as a candidate for the GOP president, she's ready to take on bullies and that somehow a woman in heels can do that better. Well, we're going to find out if her appeal will win over those MAGA voters. And turns out a diet heavy in plant-based foods, such as fresh fruits and vegetables, can reduce both the progression of prostate cancer and the likelihood that it will return. This is important information, particularly for African-American men. And American musician, producer, and streetwear designer Pharrell Williams will be Louis Vuitton's next creative director of menswear. He's got some pretty big shoes to fill after the death of Virgil Abloh, who had become an icon in the fashion world. Well, we're going to be tracking all of the trending news today. You are listening and watching Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. And in real time, I just got to talk about something that really caught my attention in the news today, and that's this parent in Miami. She took her child out of a preschool when she learned that the preschool teacher had painted this child's face and some other children in this preschool with blackface. And so it got me thinking and scratching my head about Florida. This is happening in Miami. You have Florida Governor DeSantis saying that he does not want Black history to be taught in schools. But if you don't teach Black history in schools, how will teachers like these, and this teacher says she's from Argentina, she didn't recognize that blackface was the most horrific form of racism. If you don't teach Black history in schools, how will teachers like this know that this is not acceptable in 2023? Little kids should not be, quote unquote, celebrating Black history by being painted in blackface. I think this is a wake-up call for Governor DeSantis to ensure that not only are those AP Black Studies courses taught in Florida, but that Black history is taught throughout that state. We're going to be joined by one of our contributors today. He's actually a professor at University of Central Florida, Professor Larry Walker. I want to get his take on this blackface incident that happened in Florida and also what Governor DeSantis is doing to try to kill Black history in the state. Also joined in this hour by LA Times columnist Erica Smith. She's returning. Glad to have both of these brilliant minds with us in the first hour. And in our second hour, I'm going to go one-on-one with an aspiring filmmaker whose personal story of discrimination at the hands of Black folks will leave you speechless. And then Dr. Sarah Webb is going to join us to help us make sense of colorism and its impact, not only on this filmmaker, but on all of us. So you stay tuned. Areva Martin in real time when we come forward. KBLA Talk 1580. years, we have been helping families with children with autism. Now, through a new program called CORE, we can help you. We can help you take your career to the next level by training you to become an early childhood interventionist, working with children ages 0 to 3. The CORE program will pay you $25 an hour while you are in training, pay off $10,000 of your student loan debt, and help you find a good paying job. Call 323-291-7100 or visit snnla.org to learn how you can become a CORE fellow and take your career to the next level. Don't hesitate. Apply today.
Thinking about hosting a podcast and don't know where to start? Morris Media Studios has you covered. We're a professional podcast and voiceover studio located in Leimert Park. We specialize in recording and live streaming audio and video podcasts. Let us help you set up, record, and distribute your podcast. Hosting a podcast is a great way to bring awareness to your business, product, or good cause. For more info, visit morrismediastudios.com or give us a call at 323-815-4204.
I'm getting vaccinated with Prevnar 20.
So am I, because I'm at risk for pneumococcal pneumonia.
I'm asking about Prevnar 20 because there's a chance pneumococcal pneumonia could put me in the hospital. Age 65 or older, you may be at increased risk for pneumococcal pneumonia. Ask your doctor or pharmacist about getting vaccinated with Prevnar 20, pneumococcal 20-valent conjugate vaccine, a Pfizer vaccine that can help protect against pneumococcal pneumonia in just one dose. Prevnar 20 is approved for adults to help prevent infections from 20 strains of the bacteria that cause pneumococcal pneumonia. Continued approval may depend on a supportive study. Don't get Prevnar 20 if you've had a severe allergic reaction to the vaccine or its ingredients. Adults with weakened immune systems may have a lower response to the vaccine. The most commonly reported side effect was pain at the injection site. For additional common side effects and full prescribing information, please call 1-855-213-2138 or visit Prevnar20.com.
I want to be able to keep my plans.
So I'm asking my doctor about getting vaccinated with Prevnar 20.
This is Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. This is your one-stop destination for today's trendy news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. I want to welcome to today's show LA Times columnist Erica Smith. Hello, Erica, and thanks for joining us again.
Hi, thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely. And Erica is joined by University of Central Florida professor Larry Walker. Welcome back, Larry.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Larry, got to start with you. Florida, boy, you guys got some weird stuff happening in that state. You got teachers painting little kids with blackface and then saying, well, this is what we do in Argentina. We thought it was okay to do it in the U.S. And apparently when the mom called the owner of the preschool, the owner says, oh, don't use the word racist. We don't use those words around here. But is the problem here the governor or this little preschool?
Well, the overall problem is really white supremacy. So I think it's really important to state that. I think the other thing is to remind people who are listening, watching, I am a transplant. I am originally from the great city of Philadelphia, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So I think that's really important. So people are
Larry,
not watching.
You're always trying to disavow Florida.
Listen, I got to let people know. I don't want people watching and saying this crazy brother on here talking about living in this crazy state. So I think that's the first thing I want to make clear. But so this issue for me is tragic. I've worked in public school systems years ago. So she knew what blackface is. So let me be clear. Teachers just don't go around painting kids' faces. So she had to know what blackface was. She didn't just decide to paint this child's face. I think also what's troubling is also in terms of the coordinator, whoever's overseeing this school, their response about racism. And so I would also add that you would see that kind of response, not just in Florida, but there are a lot of other places that don't see racism. And if you suggest that something is racist when it's clearly racist, that they'll pull back and say, "Oh, please don't use those kind of comments." But this is clearly racism. And we know blackface, let's be clear about blackface. It is not a U.S. phenomenon. So we don't talk about Argentina and some of our brothers and sisters in other countries, particularly the south of the United States, that blackface is prevalent in other countries in Central and South America also.
Yeah, Erica, what do you make not only of the response from the preschool owner and the teacher who says she's from Argentina and this is something that's a part of their culture, but I don't think we can, we can't dismiss the impact that Governor Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, his rhetoric about race and his, efforts to kill any teaching of Black history, any accurate teaching of Black history. How, significant do you think that is on these teachers of this school and the way they're even thinking about how they quote unquote celebrate Black history?
Yeah, I mean, you can't separate those two things. I mean, there's a reason why things like this keep happening in Florida. And, I won't insult your state too much, Larry, because I know you're a transplant, but, I do think, we have, Florida has made, at least under DeSantis is, kind of channeled this kind of thinking where, the white supremacy is allowed to kind of bubble up and it happens in this state. And, as Larry said, we can't, just because a teacher's from Argentina doesn't mean anything. As we learned here in LA, during the city council racist, audio leak, colorism is very much rampant all over, within Latino countries all over Central and South America. So this is not a phenomenon that this teacher can just brush off because they didn't understand, U.S. politics, or the history of America. But we have to teach these things. I mean, I think that's part of, every incident like this that happens just reinforces why we do need to teach African-American history in schools and be very intentional about it. Because otherwise we're going to have more instances like this. And unfortunately, probably not just in Florida.
Yeah, I think what bothered me about the story the most, obviously these little kids being used as pawns by these adults, but also this ignorance, this feigned ignorance on the part of the teacher, on the part of the owner, and the pushback to the mom that, oh no, we're not racist. We don't talk about racism. We don't see race. Those kinds of comments. I mean, they're just ignorant to begin with. But I think they have been given power. I think those kinds of sentiments, I think the actions of this school, they feel emboldened because they have a governor, they have a leader of this state that has been unapologetic about his willingness to speak openly and to deny the existence of racism and to talk about the importance of making little white kids feel comfortable. And Larry, that's how Nikki Haley is kind of kicking off her campaign. A big part of her campaign, a pledge or a big part of what she is going to run on is this notion that America is not racist. Now, obviously, she thinks that's going to play with the MAGA base, and that's to the extent she's even serious about being president and not just auditioning for vice president. But how do you think that notion or that fallacious statement that she's boldly making, how is that going to play with more conservative Republicans and then independents? Because you can't win president, you can't be the president in this country without winning over independents.
So let me be clear. Nikki Haley has less than, there's such thing. She's got negative 4% chance of becoming the Republican nominee. It's not even in the positive. So I had a chance to watch her campaign ad that she came out with, and she consistently contradicts herself. She talks about that there's no racism, and then she talks about Mother Emanuel and those tragic murders, and then she talks about, I kind of dismissing the 1619 Project. What they have in common between the beginning, in terms of facts, Black folks brought here in Jamestown, Virginia, in 1619, and Mother Emanuel is white supremacy. That's what they have in common in terms of, and particularly white mob violence. So the idea that Nikki Haley thinks that she's going to somehow convince MAGA Republicans that she should be the nominee, I would like to remind her that when President Obama, he wore the tan suit. And people lost their minds. So the idea that a woman of Indian descent, who's gender and ethnicity, right? The idea that she has a chance to be a nominee in a party that is overtly racist is, I said, about negative 4%.
Yeah, it really bugs me, Larry, when I hear these so-called moderate Republicans talk about her record in South Carolina and how she was very much out front in terms of taking down the Confederate flag and recognizing the pain that flag represents for so many people, but then did a complete 180 when she became, completely aligned with Donald Trump. And now, as you said, using that, the controversy over the Confederate flag, using that in her campaign appeal really, I think, just tells us how tone deaf she is and how delusional she is. And I like how you say she has a negative chance of becoming the president. Speaking of that Mother Emanuel, massacre that we saw happen, the horrible racist attack in that church today, Erica, we saw the racist gunman that attacked those innocent people who were just shopping in a market in Buffalo. He got sentenced, and he got sentenced to life without an opportunity or chance for parole. And it was a very emotional, the reporting is so emotional, the hearing, the victims' impact statements that were given, which are a part of what happens before someone is sentenced. Do you think any of these, the sentencing, getting life without prison, is that enough to send a message to these individuals that you cannot target Black folks in a church or in a grocery store or wherever without paying significant consequences? Do you think it's going to deter anyone?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, I think about Dylan Roof, Mother Emanuel, and we have, how many years later, this person that did, something similar in a Buffalo supermarket. I think that, kind of unfortunately where we are in this country right now with, white supremacy and racial sickness, basically, I think there's a lot of people that really are disconnected and kind of are living in their own reality. I mean, we have to remember this is a guy who subscribed to the Great Replacement theory, which goes back decades, and it goes back into other, obviously into Germany and, various different groups of people. But this is something that's been recycled. It's been used right now in this country by, a number of Christian nationalists, white supremacists, that whole, toxic mix of folks, to basically be very overt about racism. But just to go back for 1 second, when you were talking about Nikki Haley, in the way that she talks about race and that racism doesn't exist in this idea, in some ways, that's kind of the flip side of the coin, right? Because I do think there's a lot of MAGA Republicans that really want to believe that racism doesn't exist, that, they got what they got based on, their own merits, and it had nothing to do with, the racial hierarchy in this country. And so on the one hand, you have people like this, this shooter in Buffalo who's being sentenced and is very overt about racism, and you have people like Nikki Haley, and people who consider themselves pretty moderate can point to Nikki Haley and be like, I agree with what she's saying, and I want to go along with that, but I don't agree with anything what this Buffalo shooter says, but not realizing that in a lot of ways, they're two sides of the same coin. They're both, pushing a system that upholds white supremacy. So I think we have to kind of break that down when we talk about where we are in this country, particularly heading into 2024 with the elections.
Yeah, it's so dangerous to have someone like Nikki Haley, because for a lot of people, she is different than Donald Trump. She's the more composed, she's the more reserved, she's the more quote unquote, progressive Republican, if that's even a word. And they may remember what her record was in South Carolina, or her efforts to address the taking down of the Confederate flag. They may think of her as an Asian American woman, and maybe even think of her in the same light that they think of Kamala Harris. So I think just being a woman and being, less, extreme and erratic as Donald Trump, for some people may give them some comfort. But to your point, that's false, and you shouldn't find any comfort, because she's the same. She's cut from the same cloth as Donald Trump. She worked for him. She was a part of his administration. And she has really tied herself to him in ways that's making it, I think, very difficult for her to have any kind of breakout or to suggest that she is different in any way. I want to talk some, Larry, though, before we take some news and traffic, about these unidentified objects. We had all this hoopla about, shooting down of this balloon that was floating over Montana, and whether there was surveillance cameras and other equipment in there, whether China was spying on the U.S., and now we're getting reports that maybe those balloons weren't so threatening after all. I mean, what does this tell us about U.S.-China relationships, and how difficult it is for us to have relationships that won't possibly end us up in some kind of major military exercise against each other? I.e. war, I guess. Let's just call it what it is.
Yeah, I think it's important in terms of context, in terms of throughout world history, is that, superpowers are constantly going to be testing the limits. So China, and it's also important when we talk about U.S. and China in terms of the relationship, is that we're dependent on each other when it comes to trade. So let's be clear: a lot of the products and things we use here in the United States are products that are made in China. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is you're going to have escalation based on whatever variety of issues. It's the balloon this time. It sometimes, you know, in terms of the South, you have ships that China is moving closer to, you know, NATO allies. It's a push and pull, and this is consistent what world powers have done for generations. So, and I don't think that you're going to find the United States or China coming anywhere near when it comes to war, because war between the United States and China is essentially, it's like the movie from the Avengers. It's endgame for everybody. So I don't think you're going to see that. But these relationships are contentious, but we are economically dependent on each other.
Yeah, you know, I bought a bunch of furniture recently, to your point of being economically dependent. And even the tables came in little tiny boxes. And I went back to the guy, the furniture broker. I'm like, dude, what's up with this? Why weren't these like assembled pieces? He's like, well, Areva, when we started buying all of our furniture from China, this is how furniture comes into the US. And if you want a table to look like a table, you've got to buy furniture that's strictly manufactured in the US. It's going to probably take you 8 to 10 weeks to get it delivered. But if you want to buy furniture and get it overnight, like the furniture you go online and buy it from Amazon, it's coming in a box. I mean, a tiny little box with 1,200 different pieces. And you got to be really skilled to even put it together. So that's why we can't go to war with China, because we wouldn't have any goods or products in this US because we depend on them for so much, which is unfortunate. I want to ask you, Erica, when you saw this Ohio drinking water story, I mean, I was taken back to Michigan. I mean, you can't help but think about Flint and how those families have suffered for years, and the impact that drinking that contaminated water has had on the brain development of children. And so many others. What are you thinking about this Ohio now, this dangerous spill of chemicals that has caused, this fire in the East Palestine, which is near Pennsylvania? And then I'm thinking about Jackson, Mississippi. I even have an aunt that has a restaurant in Jackson, and she says she can't even run a restaurant without using bottled water. Why aren't we doing a better job, you think, in terms of how we are making our water supply safe for all of us to consume?
Yeah, I mean, I've been following that story somewhat closely. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, not too far from there, and that, East Palestine is a little bit south of Youngstown on the Pennsylvania border, as you mentioned. It's one of those areas that's been just economically depressed for years. I mean, they had a lot of plant closures. They've had, what was a stable middle class economy, when I was a kid, is not anymore. And so there's already a lot of distrust of government, particularly at the state level and the federal level. I haven't looked up the numbers, but I imagine they went for Donald Trump, probably both times. It's that kind of county. I think that it's just awful. I mean, it shows that these are the kinds of disasters. I wouldn't even call it a tragedy, because it's not something that's out of our human control, but it's the kind of thing that happens in cities regardless of, whether people are black or white, but it's a low income area. And I think that how we address that, or how we fail to, is just, one of those things that's consistent across the country. But of course, communities of color are oftentimes, the ones that receive the worst treatment of this. But I think what was so interesting about this incident was that it was, nationally, there were a few stories here or there, but there weren't a ton of stories about it until, a couple days later. And there was literally a fireball that they had no choice but to basically let this gas out of all these chemicals. And then, of course, a lot of the pollutants have gone into the Ohio River, which supplies water to a huge chunk of the Midwest. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the federal government does with this, and if they're actually going to pay more attention to it. And also the railroads that have, This is not something that, this is a private company issue too. So it's just one more community that's being, offered up as kind of victims to our commerce and unchecked capitalism. And it's just gross, really.
Yeah, you raise a great point about the fact that this hasn't gotten a lot of national media attention, given how large of a story it is, and given how many people are impacted by it, and given the similarities to Flint, Michigan, which we know it took a lot even to get that story to raise, to be raised in the consciousness of people, and how hard it takes to get stories about poor people, about people of color, in the mainstream media onto, big national news stories. Definitely need to do a better job. And obviously all of us at KBLA are trying to lift up those stories. And I think we all have to just do better, because those people are, these are serious. These contaminated water can cause brain damage, can stop the development of a child, pregnant women. I'm thinking about women who are pregnant and young kids. So we're not talking about, oh, the water doesn't taste good, but we're talking about really serious health implications as a result. When we come forward, we're going to talk about a lot of news today about men, from sperm to prostate cancer to a new fashion icon at Louis Vuitton. My contributors will be back. Erica Smith at LA Times and Professor Larry Smith will be back. It's not your name, Larry. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's all right.
Oh, I'm going to get it right when we come back with sports news and traffic coming up. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580.
After tonight, the Lakers will have only 23 games to qualify for the Western Conference playoffs. NBA legend Michael Jordan is celebrating his 60th birthday this Friday by donating $10 million to the Make-A-Wish Foundation. It's the largest donation in the 43-year history of Make-A-Wish. Tiger Woods is getting back on the course. He said he's playing in next week's Genesis Invitational in nearby Pacific Palisades. First competition for Tiger since he missed the cut at the British Open last July. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. This sports report was brought to you by Original Taco Pete.
Aaron at Original Taco Pete's. Come in today for our tasty seasoned black taco. We're at 3272 West Slauson off Crenshaw, or call 323-348-4441.
Follow the leader. KBLA Talk 1580. Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Here at McKay's Family Mortuary, we offer a full line of services with a fine selection of caskets and urns. Also, assistance with cemeteries, along with luxury limousine and funeral coaches, and other needs pertaining to your family's wishes for your loved one. We accept Veterans Victim Witness Program for mortuary services only at zero cost to you. Cemetery selection does not apply. All insurances are accepted. McKay's Funeral Home understands that saying goodbye is never easy. That's why we've been providing compassionate and professional funeral services to the community for over a decade. Please contact McKay's Family Mortuary, serving Los Angeles, San Bernardino, and Riverside counties and the High Desert. 3918 Marine Avenue, Lawndale, California. 310-978-8877. That's 310-978-8877. By appointment only, or log on to mckaysmortuaries.com.
The Millionaires Roundtable with Lynn Richardson is creating millionaires one family, one day, $1, one dime at a time. KBLA Talk 1580 will be celebrating Black History Month Wealth with Lynn Richardson live on Wednesday, February 22nd at the Chase Community Center on Crenshaw and Vernon in Leimert Park. Come check out the space. This location has been a bank branch for over 44 years and is now a community center. It provides resources and education to help the community with money goals, home ownership, and entrepreneurship. You and a guest can win lunch with Lynn Richardson February 22nd. Go to KBLA1580.com or the KBLA 1580 mobile app today and register. See you there.
Hi, this is Tavis.
Harris, this is Dr. King. We've got a lot to talk about. I'll be in town on the 28th of February. Can you clear your calendar?
Absolutely, Dr. King. Good Lord, do I have some questions for you, sir. Hi, it's Tavis.
Assalamu alaikum, my brother. This is Minister Malcolm. Now, I heard that you and Martin are getting together for a public dialogue on February 28th. You see, now I already know the date. Now, I know y'all not trying to keep me out of that conversation, are you?
No, sir. No, sir.
What happened to George Floyd shouldn't happen, not even to a dog. How long must the Negro continue to endure this foolishness at the hands of law enforcement? People can take but so much before they reach a breaking point. What do you mean, Black Lives Matter? Black lives haven't mattered in this country since Negroes stopped working for free at the end of slavery. You ought to be talking about Black Guns Matter and start your own NRA. Call it the Negro Revolutionary Amalgamation.
Don't miss this compelling historic radio event, The Return. When Tavis Smiley converses with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. Tuesday, February 28th, 9 a.m. Pacific Time, exclusively on KBLA Talk 1580.
We are back, and you're listening to Areva Martin in real time. I'm your host, Areva Martin, and I am joined in this hour I have two brilliant minds with me today, and one is LA Times columnist Erica Smith, and my other brilliant contributor is University of Central Florida professor Larry Walker, not Larry Smith, but Larry Walker. Correct. I stand corrected. I apologize, Larry.
That's fine.
Said, as long as I don't associate you with Florida, I can call you anything. But I want to call you by your name that your mom and daddy gave you. So it's Professor Larry Walker. So stand corrected. In my second hour, we're going to be talking about colorism. We're going to be talking about this young filmmaker who tells this very powerful story of being discriminated against by people who look like him. And then we're going to be joined by Dr. Sarah Webb. She's the founder of Colorism Healing LLC. You can download the KBLA app wherever apps are found. You can also follow me at Areva Martin on all social media platforms and post us a comment on YouTube. If you are watching us on YouTube, post a comment. We'd love to hear from you. We were talking about the trending news, and men are in the news today. Larry, they're getting close to a male birth control that they said is pretty promising. You know, several years back, there was some efforts to create birth control that would work for men, and they stopped kind of mid-discovery because they were concerned about the side effects. Now, you know, you're not a woman, but if you have ever talked to a woman about birth control, you know, there are lots of side effects associated with birth control pills and other birth control methods that many women use, and never have they stopped investigating the possibility of them because there were side effects. But are you excited that there's some promise for men in terms of birth control?
I mean, I do. I think it's important. And so I think some of the points you made about them stopping. So I'm assuming many of the scientists of those funders were males when they realized there were side effects, because you said women are used to this for years. So I do think it's encouraging news. And men do need to take on more of a responsibility when it comes to issues relating to, you know, overall protection of reproductive health. I must add that I'm out of the game. So my son is an adult. I'm retired, but I do think it's really important for men to also be responsible. Like I said, when it comes to family planning overall.
Why do you think, Erica, this is such a difficult conversation? There's a wonderful book by, it's called Ejaculate Responsibly, and it's by Gabrielle Blair. And the book real short book, but very powerful, and talks about how ridiculous it is in this country that we place all of the responsibility, or almost all of it, on women to, be the ones that prevent unwanted pregnancies. And then when women do get pregnant in many states, and now our U.S. Supreme Court says you can't get an abortion, when, according to Gabrielle, there's a real simple solution to all of this. If men would just ejaculate responsibly, i.e. don't put your sperm someplace where you know it can create a baby if you don't want a baby. But why do you think this conversation in this country always ends? I think it starts and ends with the woman being the responsible party for preventing pregnancy.
I mean, I think it's just the way it's always been, unfortunately. I think I would like to think it's gotten better in my lifetime. I think it reminds me of, the marathon sessions in the House of Representatives, where there were a number of male members of Congress who were watching their kids, and what a spectacle that was, and how much praise they got, and that was such a novel concept because, the House, the Capitol was not designed for families. And, the fact that was such a big deal, where if it was women doing it, I'm sure it would have had a totally different context. Like, why are you bringing your kids to work, but also expecting women to, raise families and, do all of the things. So I don't know. I hope that this new form of birth control will contribute to, at least evening out some of the responsibility of not just preventing unwanted pregnancies, but also of, having families and managing families. And I do think, at least on that subject, I think we're starting to see more of that in popular culture. So maybe we just need to rewind a bit and talk about family planning before the kids are actually here.
Yes, I hope that we start to have those kind of conversations. And Larry, obviously very progressive and enlightened man, and says, hey, yes, men should take more responsibility. And to be honest with you, Larry, whenever I have this conversation with men, they always say exactly what you say. But the reality is that most policymakers at the federal and state level are men. And
right.
We have all these draconian policies that continue to put the burden and responsibility on women. So how is it that every time I ask a man, they're like, yeah, I'm in favor of, whatever men can do to share in the responsibility, but yet we don't see that reflected in real policy?
Well, that's often because a lot of policymakers, and I say this as one worked for a former policymaker, that, policymakers often are hypocritical. Let's be clear. You have to, policy and purpose have to be connected. So what's the purpose? And then how does that policy relate to the purpose? And we don't see that a lot, and we don't see it enough. And obviously I made the joke earlier about those researchers stopping, mid-study when men feel any difficulties. And I think this is all connected. And generally as men, we have to do a better responsibility. And look, we have seen a culture shift, I would say, the last 15 to 20 years. That more men are taking on more responsibility. In some cases, some men staying at home, taking care of the family, while the wife may be the primary breadwinner.
That progress, Larry, come on, be honest. It's so slow.
I mean, it's slow.
It's really confined to just a small, really small group.
I'm trying
super high income earning men who don't really need to work anyhow.
I'm just trying to say we're moving the needle a little bit, but like I said, let's be frank, we're not moving the needle enough. And you're right, when it comes to women's reproductive health, the onus is always placed on women, but men. And as a Black man, we have to do better in terms of being responsible, and he's having a conversation about family planning. And also, like I said, as policymakers, what's in the best interest of women, because women always bear the brunt.
So I was just kind of looking at, you're right, I was trying to figure out, why did they stop kind of mid-discovery with some of those other male birth control efforts? And not surprisingly, most of those other methods had hormonal effects on men. They would lower the male testosterone, and low testosterone can lower the sex drive of a man and can cause erectile dysfunction. So that's why the male scientists were like, hell no, we're not doing birth control because we can't have lower sex drives and we can't have issues with erectile dysfunction. Now, not the same level of concern when it comes to women who, for years, we know many birth control methods for women have had, have hormonal effects on women. And that has never stopped, again, the development and production of those kinds of birth control methods. I just wish that we didn't have such a hypocritical system. Larry, you said you worked for elected officials or policymakers. What do we do? Erica, is there you see any solution to really moving, not at the snail's pace, but at a much more rapid pace, for there to be a real sense of shared responsibility in, who has children, or, who creates children and bring into this world?
I think it's maybe minor, but I think it's important. I think that, as Larry talked about, that shift we've had in the last 15 years where, granted it's high earning men, but, showing men who are taking care of their kids and not making it weird and an anomaly. I think that, it's a little to nothing thing, but I think that, culturally, if people start to understand that men are supposed to take care of their kids and are supposed to be involved in family planning. And this is an expectation. This is not a weird thing that just happens randomly to LeBron James. We need to normalize this in our culture. And so I think anything that we can do to normalize that is going to help.
Yeah, and a little low testosterone or a little erectile dysfunction ain't gonna hurt nobody. That's what I would say about that. When we come forward, more about news about men, and the next topic is prostate cancer and what men need to do to ward off prostate cancer. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580.
In real time on KBLA Talk 1580.
Did you know Rihanna did not get paid for her Super Bowl halftime performance? Maisha Cairo here with your K-Black Minute News, brought to you by Lendistry. As you may know, on Super Bowl Sunday, Barbados' own Rihanna, aka Robin Fenty, put on a 13-minute performance during the Philadelphia Eagles versus Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl game. During her now viral halftime show, she shocked the world by confirming she's expecting her second baby with boyfriend A$AP Rocky. News quickly began to circulate that she didn't get paid for the performance. Well, truth is, no artist ever gets a check for performing at the Super Bowl. By Tuesday, following her performance, her Spotify streams received a 640% boost. She did get paid. I'm Maisha Cairo, and that's your K-Black Minute News.
Thanks to our new sponsor, Lendistry. Lendistry is a national Black-led small business lender that is headquartered in Los Angeles. Lendistry helps small business owners access the affordable capital needed to grow. Visit Lendistry, LENDISTRY.com/KBLA today.
California is a great place to live and work, but those aren't easy things to do for students also going to college. That's why the state created the Californians for All College Corps, a way for students to build skills and help others while earning up to $10,000 for school. Commit to serve your community and we'll help you pay for college. Spots will fill up fast, so learn more and apply today at www.cacollegecorps.com. That's www.cacollegecorps.com. California is a great place to live and work, but those aren't easy things to do for students also going to college. That's why the state created the Californians for All College Corps, a way for students to build skills and help others while earning up to $10,000 for school. Commit to serve your community and we'll help you pay for college. Spots will fill up fast, so learn more and apply today at www.cacollegecorps.com. That's www.cacollegecorps.com.
The Los Angeles Urban League and Parkside Economic Development Corporation are working to close the wealth gap between Black and white households. B-Warp, the Black Wealth Attainment and Retention Program's free virtual workshops will help your family acquire, gain, maintain, and pass down legacy wealth. Learn from the experts about making more with what you have, the Black history of money, joining the Smart Investors Club, preserving your assets in tough times, crypto, cash in or cash out, the wealthy mind and body. Register for this free series that could change your financial future at laul.org/BWAARP. Don't miss B-Warp, the Black Wealth Attainment and Retention Program, every second and fourth Thursday in February, March, and April at 6 p.m. Pacific Time. Register now at laul.org/BWAARP.
life is uncertain. It's okay to feel stressed, anxious, worried, or frustrated. It's normal. With CalHope's free and secure mental health resources, it's easy to get the help you and your loved ones need when you need it the most. Call our warm line at 833-317-4673 or live chat at calhope.org.
This is Areva Martin in real time. I'm your host, Areva Martin, and I am joined in this hour by my two contributors, Professor Larry Walker and Erica Smith. And it's lots of news today, really focused on men. New study out that says that a diet heavy in plant-based foods, such as fresh fruits and vegetables, can reduce both the progression of prostate cancer and the likelihood that it will return. And this is really significant news because we know African American men are at an increased risk for developing prostate cancer over white men and even other men of color. 1 in 6 Black men will develop prostate cancer in his lifetime. So essentially, Black men are 1.7 times more likely to be diagnosed with and 2.1 times more likely to die from prostate cancer than white men. Larry, how encouraged are you by this new research out that says that fresh fruits and vegetables can reduce the progression of prostate cancer, particularly when you look at the increased risk that Black men are at for developing prostate cancer?
I think the news is, I think it's encouraging news. I think the other thing is when we talk about these plant-based diets, we also have to talk about food deserts, because historically, Black folks don't have access to healthy fruits and vegetables in their communities. And we see these food deserts throughout the United States. So the news is, the research study is great, but we needed to figure out how do we make sure that men, and obviously particularly brothers, have access to healthy foods so they can live healthy lives, not only in terms of avoiding prostate cancer, but health disease, diabetes, all these other debilitating health issues that disproportionately impact the Black community. So we need to connect these studies with how do we make sure make sure folks have access to healthy foods.
No, great point. Clearly, still lots of communities where you can't even go into a market and purchase fresh fruits or vegetables. But Erica, what do you make of, I don't know, and I'm sure you have men in your friend circle, I know I do, who don't have that issue, don't have issues of access to healthy foods or fresh fruits and fresh vegetables. They're smart, they're educated, they know this research, but yet they continue to engage in, make certain lifestyle choices that aren't consistent with, either reducing the progression of prostate cancer, or doing those things that we just know just generally will make them healthier. How do we get through to those men?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd put my father in that category, who's had prostate cancer. It is a challenge. I think it's a challenge for our community overall. I mean, I think, health is not necessarily something that I think as a people we've prioritized enough. I think part of that, as Larry said, is about food deserts and about the fact that we don't have the resources that a lot of communities do to be healthy. I mean, you look at COVID, for example, like how many people were living in overcrowded housing that were more exposed to the virus compared to people who are living in wealthier neighborhoods with more parks and more, walking trails and that's, true across the country. So I think it's about, on the one hand, it's a structural issue as far as where we live, the built environment, grocery stores.
So Erica, let's go back to your dad, because it sounds like your dad doesn't have any of those structural issues. Sounds like he knows what the research says. He has access to, healthy foods, but I think you're suggesting he's not making good choices.
He goes on and off, but I think his office, I think it's about the fact that it's a short-term thinking, right? It's about, the short-term gratification. And I think it's, he's in his 70s. I think it's a lifelong thing that he learned ways of eating habits that has maintained, and it's probably been harder for him to break as he's gotten older. I think that it's about learning new things and prioritizing health. I think a lot of it goes back to just, we don't really think about health in the way that we probably should and center our lives. And I do think the fact of where we live in our structural environment does have an impact in that as well.
Larry, how do we start to change some of those attitudes? How do we start to prioritize that health? I'm just thinking about my husband. My husband decided he got some bad readings related to his cholesterol from his doctor, asked his doctor what could he do to avoid having to go on medication. Doctor said, dude, just do meatless Mondays. And if you know my husband, he's just like, anal compulsive person. So rather than meatless Mondays, he came home and said, I'm just going plant-based, just cold turkey, not just Monday, but every day of the week. And he's been vegan now for at least a year and a half. And when he tells people that he's vegan, oh my God, they're like, man, I couldn't give up my ribs. Dude, you're not eating any bacon. I mean, they give him all of this negative pushback rather than like, hey, that's great. You didn't have to go on medication. You're eating better. You're getting healthier. How do we change that narrative in our community so that when people do make healthy choices, they get, a little affirmation rather than pushback?
And that's a cultural change. That's a U.S. cultural issue because we were like meat and potatoes, right? He's a meat and potatoes man. So, all the commercials we watch, I'm an Eagles fan. We watch the Super Bowl and the commercials you get, masculinity, we're riding trucks and, doing all these other things. And that feeds that narrative into when you're not eating meat, when you choose this, like, a vegan lifestyle, that somehow makes you less than. I think another key point is exercise. I work out 4 or 5 days a week. So I eat healthy, but I also work out. So it's really important that only we talk about in terms of we have to have that balance between what you eat, getting enough sleep, stay hydrated, and also exercise consistently.
No, excellent point. Obviously, we got to keep moving. And we know also in our community, we don't always prioritize health in terms of exercise and movement. But Erica, Larry said we got to shift the culture. How do we do that? Because again, he's right. The patriarchal male, the strong male figure is not eating leafy vegetables, right? They're eating big T-bone steaks. And if you're not doing that, somehow you're less, less manly. You're not manning up, I guess. I don't know. It's kind of ridiculous for me, but I want to be sensitive to those people who buy into that. So what do we do, Erica? Got any quick, tips for how we shift the culture so that men can eat healthy and ward off prostate cancer and live longer so we can have some Black grandfathers and great grandfathers in our community?
Maybe it's, Larry, as he said, he's watching the Super Bowl. Maybe it's a matter of a ton of those NFL athletes that are all Black men, they don't walk around necessarily eating the crap that, half of our other Black men in our community do. A lot of them probably are vegan or vegetarian, and they have very balanced diets, and they do work out, multiple days a week. Maybe it's highlighting those people and talking about this is another example of how to be a manly man. Maybe it's that simple.
Yeah, and one thing my husband is real good about, he doesn't proselytize. He's not trying to turn the world into vegans. People just ask him because he's naturally lost 30 pounds as a result, not just becoming vegan, but doing what you said, Larry, exercising 4 or 5 times a week. In fact, he's become a little obsessive with exercise, but that's probably better than not. But I think we all have a responsibility to affirm and uplift those folks who are trying to make some healthier choices, because we are talking about, longevity and living longer. And we know that people are living longer. People are living, into their 80s and 90s and even 100s. And many times when you talk to those folks, one of the secrets is the diet, their exercise. There's some pretty simple things that people are doing to live longer. So they're not great big secrets, but I think as a community, we just have a lot of work to do in that area. Thank you so much, Professor Larry Walker, University of Central Florida, for joining me. Always a pleasure to see you. And thank you, Erica Smith, LA Times columnist, for helping us kick this hour off and helping us break down some of today's trending news. Always a pleasure to see both of you.
Thank you.
Come back real soon. All right, in my second hour, I'm going to go one-on-one with an aspiring filmmaker whose personal story of discrimination at the hands of Black folks will leave you speechless. Also get you caught up on today's trending news. And then Dr. Sarah Webb is going to join us. She's going to talk about colorism. What does it mean? How it impacted this filmmaker and how it really has a detrimental impact on all of our mental health. More Areva Martin in real time after news, sports, and traffic right here on KBLA Talk 1580.